Hello and welcome to the Azure Stack HCI show. Hello Manfred, how are you doing today?
Hello Sven, fine. I'm looking forward to our session today where we've planned several live demos about Azure Arc and Resource Bridge.
Yes, and I'm super excited because this is the last show before Microsoft Ignite. So next Tuesday, the Microsoft Ignite will start, and we expect to have a lot of announcements about Azure Stack HCI, Azure Hybrid, and so on and so on. And in the next Azure Stack HCI show, 2 weeks from now on, we will talk about all these announcements. So I'm super excited. Hopefully you are too. And as Manfred already mentioned, today we will talk about Azure Arc and the Resource Bridge. So 4 weeks ago, we gave an update about Azure Stack HCI, some basics, what you have to know, very basic. 2 weeks ago, we talked about licensing, wasn't it? Licensing?
And we had the Windows Admin Center
Windows
part
Admin
included.
Center,
Yeah,
correct. We
so
talked
Windows
about the
Admin Center
Windows
management.
Admin Center 2 weeks ago, and today we talk about, or will talk about, the Azure Arc and Azure Arc Resource Bridge. So, okay, so let's start and talk about the strategy of Microsoft behind the Azure Arc and Azure Arc Resource Bridge. So Azure is our focus at Microsoft, because everyone wants to go into the cloud, some more, some less, but people want to have the public cloud. And that's why Microsoft decided multiple years ago to have a cloud offering for every customer around the world. And that is called Azure, the world's computer. But there are a lot of dependencies, and some customers want to go into the cloud, but they are not able to do it, not completely. And that's why a lot of customers say, we keep remaining hybrid, especially enterprises. So 82% of worldwide customers that have been asked about their cloud strategy said cloud is something we are thinking about or what we are already doing. But 28% says we need to keep some data on premises. And if we look at the cloud itself, the public cloud, 92% say we do not have one vendor. We have multiple vendors offering public cloud, and of course Azure is one of them, but we have multiple of them. So the question is, how does Microsoft react on these two different learnings? So learning number one is, if customers want to stay on premises because of technical issues or legal restrictions, our idea is to bring Azure to our customers. So wherever our customers are in a disconnected scenario, in their own data centers or at the growing edge, we want to bring Azure benefits to our customers where they are. So they do not bring everything to Azure to get the benefits of Azure, but they can bring partially Azure to their own data centers. This is what Azure Arc is about. And the other thing is, if customers have a multiple public cloud, then the question will be how to manage this multiple cloud. So you have a lot of workloads, a lot of Windows servers, Linux instances, somewhere in the public cloud, but it would be super helpful to manage all of these from one single portal. And this is what Azure Arc is about as well. So if you look at this slide, you can see that Azure includes a control plane, the Azure control plane, where you are able to manage all your instances you have on Azure, where you can manage your licensing. So you can say, okay, what departments do I have? How do I split cost? What workloads do I want from Azure? How do I maintain the security and things like that? But everything is related to Azure or restricted to Azure. But with Azure Arc, we are opening the opportunities for our customers to use Azure. And you could say you can split Azure Arc in two main buckets. So one is the Azure Arc enabled infrastructure. So you have your Windows server or your Linux instances, or you're running Azure Stack HCI or an Hyper-V environment, and you want to have or keep this on premises, but you want to make it visible in Azure. So you are able to see everything that's outside of Azure inside of Azure. And this is possible with the Azure Arc enabled servers and Azure Arc enabled infrastructure. So you bring your non-Azure services or workloads to Azure, not physically. So they remain being in your data center or on your edge or in other public clouds, but they are visible in Azure. And on the other side, you have the Azure Arc enabled services. These are services Microsoft is offering for Azure customers. And with the Azure Arc enabled services, you are able to bring these services to your on-premises, so into your edge or into the public cloud outside of Azure. So in this slide, you can see more or less how it works. So you have the customer has access to the control plane. In the control plane, they can manage everything inside of Azure in the past. And now with Azure Arc, we are including the multi-cloud, the data centers, and the edge environment of our customers into the control plane of Azure. And we can bring Azure services to the data center and edge of our customer or to the multi-cloud. So it's no longer limited to the Azure data centers to use the Azure control plane and all the benefits of the Azure services, but also you can expand this to your on-premises as well. So Manfred, do you want to add something about Azure Arc, or do you want to show how Azure Arc looks like and do
I think this is a good point, to have a short look at what you explained, because maybe for those that didn't use it till now, it's a little bit hard to understand, because as you mentioned, we have in Azure these powerful platform services, so we can run, for example, virtual machines in Azure. I think you know this or you have heard about it. You can have storage accounts, you can have SQL Server, and so on. But Azure is also very, very powerful, as Sven described, regarding the management interface. So for example, if I create a virtual machine and I go to create Azure virtual machine, I have a very powerful wizard that helps to go through the steps that are required for this virtual machine creation, to fix the name, the virtual hard disks, and so on. The interesting thing is when we are using Azure Arc, we have all these things also for machines that are running on premises. And Sven mentioned we have this category of the Arc-enabled infrastructure. We can see this here. We have the machines. Machines are servers. You could say servers or machines or computers. The new name for it is machines because it's a little bit neutral. It can be a virtual machine, it can be a physical machine, it can be a Windows machine, it can be a Linux machine. So these are servers or machines, physical or virtual. And as you can see here, I have a huge list of these machines, and none of these machines is running in an Azure data center. All these machines are running in my own data center. These are some physical hosts. These are this machine that starts with an PS. These are the D21, 201, 204. These are virtual machines. So I can mix them here. And the advantage is, as soon as I take such a server, for example, this one here, I can see things like configuration. I can see things like changes that happened on this machine. And I can reconfigure things. On the left-hand side, we can see we have the policies, we have the machine configuration, and we have new things like auto-manage SQL Server configuration, update management, we have the inventory, the change tracking. This is very powerful, where we can see what changed, how the workflow on this machine was. And here you can see, okay, this is a machine with an operating system with Azure Stack HCI, but the operating system can be Windows Server, Azure Stack HCI or Linux, but Azure Stack HCI has the deepest Arc integration. This is not an official statement by Microsoft, but if you work with these Azure Arc things, you will realize that you have the deepest integration in the Azure Stack HCI operating system, because when you install Azure Stack HCI and you connect your Azure Stack HCI to Azure, the Azure Arc integration is automatically there. In Windows Server, it's an optional step. In Linux, it's an optional step. In Azure Stack HCI, it's integrated. And here on the bottom, we have additional capabilities, is the name for these tools, where we can configure the update management, the log analytics, security settings for these machines, and so on. So let's say Arc is a small agent that is installed to the machines where we have additional capabilities when this agent is on the machines. And this is the infrastructure part. We have it for machines. We have it for virtual machines. This is a preview, so maybe Microsoft will separate this in the future, physical machines and virtual machines. We have Azure Stack HCI. We have Kubernetes cluster. There's integration for VMware available and for System Center Virtual Machine Manager. And Sven already mentioned these data services and application services. For sure, we have the infrastructure, but there are also things like SQL Server or PostgreSQL, and there are application services like functions, logical apps, IoT things, and this can also be Arc enabled to enhance the Azure portal capability to these services that run on premises in my scenario. As Sven mentioned, this could also be in another hyperscaler's data center, because it's an agent inside the virtual machine or an agent on the host. So if you don't have access to the host because you are running in another data center from another hyperscaler, then you can install the agent inside the virtual machine. Yeah, so the first view on the Azure Arc functionality. I'm not sure if you have additional information about Azure Arc, or we will already switch to Azure Arc Resource Bridge, Sven.
I have a very important information, because
Yeah.
Azure Arc is absolutely for free.
Oh,
And
yes.
this is super important to know, that you do not have to invest any dollars to test it or to use it. Of course, if you use Azure Arc related services that bring benefits to your data center, for example, then you have to pay for the services as well as you would have to pay for the services on Azure. So these services are not for free, but Azure Arc itself is absolutely for free. And it's more or less pre-installed, pre-integrated in modern tools like Azure Stack HCI. So in older Windows servers, for example, it's possible to install this agent. And in the next version of Windows Server, I think it's there by default. So it's super simple to click it on and off. Yeah, but it's possible to integrate your Windows Server or your Linux instances without any cost. And that's good news, I guess.
Yeah. When you mention that Azure Arc is for free, then I think it's important to add that also Azure Lighthouse is for free, because what's interesting, if you are a Microsoft partner and you think about, you have many customers that have enabled their machines via Azure Arc, then you could think about using Azure Lighthouse to have a view from your partner perspective across your customers, and where you can see incidents, changes, security configurations across all machines, across all your customers that are Arc enabled. So the first step is they have to be Arc enabled. And the second step is you have to use Azure Lighthouse, and Azure Lighthouse as a service itself, it's also for free. The same what Sven said about Azure Arc. The additional functionality of Lighthouse is for free. If you enable services via Azure Lighthouse where you have to pay for, then for sure you have the cost for these specific services.
Okay, so you already mentioned Azure Arc Resource Bridge. What
Yes.
is it? What kind of benefits does it bring? Is it part of Azure Arc or something completely different with a very familiar name? So Azure Arc, yes, we know. Azure Arc Resource Bridge, what is it?
Yeah, the interesting thing is I switched to the Azure Arc Resource Bridges here, and we can see this is also a part of the Azure Arc blade in Azure, and it's in this category management where we have data controllers, custom locations, and so on. And two of my resource bridges are offline. This is not a technical issue, but because of Ignite next week, I'm actually in the transitioning from Arc Resource Bridge actual version to next version. So there will be some announcements next week, and I'm upgrading these machines. So I have left one of these old resource bridges running for our demo today, and this is the first one. The other ones are in the upgrading phase, and they will be usable, I think, starting end of next week. The interesting thing is that I think you can imagine if you use the Azure portal to configure things on premises, then it might happen, for example, you want to start a virtual machine that is not Azure Arc enabled itself. You maybe want to change the configuration of a virtual machine that is not Azure Arc enabled itself, or maybe you want to deploy a new virtual machine via the Azure portal that is where the virtual machine is on premises and not in the Azure data center. And this Azure Arc Resource Bridge, as the name says, it's a bridge for resources. This Azure Arc Resource Bridge can, for example, cover and save and store virtual machine images. So when I switch to one of my Azure Stack HCI clusters, I will choose Azure Stack HCI here and navigate to all clusters and go to my cluster 101 here. And here I have the virtual machine images. These virtual machine images are resources, as we can read here. So these resources here are stored in or managed by the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. Virtual machine images, disks, virtual networks, virtual machines, and there are more resources that can be handled via the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. And here we can see I have already some of these resources in my Azure Arc Resource Bridge. I have, for example, a Windows 10 image, a Windows 11 image, Windows Server 2022 Azure Edition, Azure Edition Core, and so on. They can read that the resource bridge actually is a preview. So this is not a feature for your production environment. It's for proof of concept, for testing. I'm looking forward what changes here in the portal next week. I don't know what exactly changes, but I expect that this limited experience will be removed because we will see some additional functionality here. But what we already have is very powerful because I can add here images to the resource bridge. Important, the resource bridge is a resource on my local cluster. Before I proceed here, let's have a look at my local cluster. This is my Azure Stack HCI cluster in a local view in the failover cluster manager. And when we check the list of my virtual machines, I can see here these are virtual machines with names I have defined. And there's a virtual machine with a, say, a little bit strange name. It's this 00F42 and so on. And we can read its control plane and so on. So this is my Azure Arc Resource Bridge VM. So this represents the Arc Resource Bridge VM. And this is the component that communicates with the Azure portal. So this VM is only available if we have the Arc Resource Bridge enabled. If we have the Azure Stack HCI cluster only Azure Arc enabled, this was the first part, then we only have the Azure Arc agent on these machines. This is a different thing. This is a small agent. Let's have a short look at this Azure Arc agent. Let's navigate to one of my machines. So for example, let's go to the to this cluster 101, and let's select one of the machines here via the Windows Admin Center. This is the tool where we had to look in the last session, so 2 weeks ago. So let's switch to the servers. Let's go to the inventory, and here we can manage the servers of this Azure Stack HCI cluster. Let's take this one here and select the manage option. So we will jump directly to the server management page of this machine, and we have the installed apps here. So installed apps. So these are apps that are installed on this Azure Stack HCI node locally. And here we can see the Azure Connected Machine agent. So this is the Azure Arc agent. So this is independent from the Azure Arc Resource Bridge, but for sure the Azure Arc Resource Bridge expects that we have Arc enabled servers. Yeah? But for sure, we can have Azure Arc enabled servers, even with Azure Stack HCI, without having an Azure Arc resource bridge. So the resource bridge is an additional thing we can configure optionally. And I did this in my environment. And this machine here represents the Azure Arc resource bridge. And when I now go to the Azure portal back and I select here the images, when I say, okay, let's take this VM image from the Azure Marketplace, then I have form where I can select images from the Marketplace. So I could choose, for example, the Windows Server Data Center Azure Edition hot patch, a new edition. This is actually not stored in my resource bridge. And I could download this one from the Azure portal, from the Azure gallery to my local resource bridge. The advantage is when I now deploy virtual machines based on this image, I don't have to deploy this, let's say 5 or 6 gigabytes every time I deploy a virtual machine from the Azure portal, because the image is already stored locally. So we have a question in the chat. It says, hello from Solingen. Is there an Azure Arc integration for VMware hypervisors to manage the VMs via Azure Arc? So there is an Azure Arc resource bridge available for VMware, but not for the hypervisors. You will need the vCenter. There's a vCenter integration for Azure Arc, and the specific features are different compared to Azure Stack HCI. So yes, the Azure Arc functionality is also available there. The idea is similar, but these are different product teams that are developing the Arc resource bridge for Azure Stack HCI, for VMware. And we have seen there's also an Arc resource bridge for System Center Virtual Machine Manager, the Microsoft management suite for example, Hyper-V based on the System Center Virtual Machine Manager. And so when you are asking about specific features, you have to look exactly at this version of the resource bridge. From the architecture, it's also available there, yes. Okay, so
perfect.
we can,
yeah. We had some short demos. I think before we continue with the demo, we should separate Azure Arc and Azure Arc Resource Bridge a little bit more. So I recommend, or let's do it that way. I asked some questions, and you tell the audience, is Azure Arc needed or Azure Arc Resource Bridge?
Okay.
For example, to make Windows Server or Linux instances visible in Azure, I think that's simple. You need Azure Arc. Yes. If you want to start or stop virtual machines, is it Azure Arc or Azure Arc Resource Bridge?
It's Azure Arc Resource Bridge. We can do this later in a live demo. This is Azure Arc Resource Bridge, yeah.
If you want to upgrade your Windows Server or Linux instances to the latest version or do some patches or things like that, is this possible with Arc or Resource Bridge, or do you need something else?
This is possible via Azure Arc, so you don't need the resource bridge for Windows update management, patch management. Yeah.
And if you want to deploy new VMs on your on-premises through the Azure portal, then you need the Azure Arc Resource Bridge.
Absolutely, yeah.
How about security offerings in Azure? So Defender for Cloud, for example. Can I use this for my on-premises infrastructure? And do I need Arc or Resource Bridge?
So the Defender functionality for the server endpoint, independently if it's Linux or Windows Server or Azure Stack HCI, can be enabled via the Azure portal for Arc-enabled servers. So we don't need the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. It's an Arc agent feature, yeah.
And if we look a little bit into the future, customer wants to use the AVD on Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah.
What is the role of Azure Arc Resource Bridge, or what will be the role of Azure Arc Resource Bridge?
The role of the Azure Arc Resource Bridge will be to provide an easy deployment for Azure Virtual Desktop, because if you test Azure Virtual Desktop today manually, then you install a virtual machine locally. You use your resources, you download them from the Azure portal, you install a virtual machine locally, you install some agents, you enable these agents with a connectivity to Azure, and then you have an hybrid Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. And this deployment is officially announced to be optimized so that it's possible via the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. And if it's okay, I can show this in the portal, because when I choose such a cluster, we have this already in the portal. It's not completely functional today, but here on my cluster, I can see there's an Azure Virtual Desktop getting started with it, where I can start here in deployment, and I can read here prerequisites met. And this is here green when I have deployed the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. Because when I have the Azure Arc Resource Bridge, the Azure portal can distribute the image that is needed for the installation to my Arc Resource Bridge. It can trigger via the Azure Arc Resource Bridge the deployment of new virtual machines. And maybe in the future, or maybe already next week, I don't know it, this hybrid Azure Virtual Desktop deployment can also use the capabilities of Azure Arc Resource Bridge to start and stop virtual machines on demand, because this is an interesting thing in Azure Virtual Desktop, that we can optimize our consumption in turning off unused virtual machines and start virtual machines if we need more resources. And the capability is there via the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. And my expectation is that this will be also provided in this Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. And if you have Azure Stack HCI already in your environment and you look to the portal, then maybe you will have a red sign here, prerequisites not met, and this means you don't have installed the Azure Arc Resource Bridge.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question is, do I need Azure Stack HCI as a host operating system to use Azure Arc Resource Bridge, or is it possible to do it with a normal Hyper-V on my host?
The Azure Arc Resource Bridge we are seeing in the rest of the demo only runs on Azure Stack HCI. But as we mentioned in the previous question, the Azure Arc Resource Bridge is also available for the VMware vCenter environments and for System Center Virtual Machine Manager. And there, the Arc Resource Bridge runs in these hypervisor environments. So for example, in SCVMM, it runs on a Windows Server hypervisor. Yeah.
And we talked a lot about VMs. How about containers?
Yeah.
So you use AKS, and are there any dependencies?
Yeah.
Or don't I need a hybrid, the resource bridge for that?
We don't need the resource bridge to deploy virtual machines or to deploy containers if it doesn't matter for us how we do it. But if we want to use the power of the Azure portal to deploy virtual machines, where I usually have the focus on, or containers, where some companies are already very involved, then when we want to take the power of the Azure portal, then we need the Azure Arc resource bridge. And the interesting thing about this is here we can see the Kubernetes clusters. And I think I have one of them. I have 3 of them here. Yes, I have 3 of these Kubernetes clusters in my environment. The Azure Arc resource bridge itself, so this interesting virtual machine here, is also an Azure Kubernetes cluster. So the Azure Arc resource bridge from the technology perspective is provided via an AKS cluster that is deployed in our environment.
Okay, and my last question is, Azure Arc is for free. How about the resource bridge?
Yeah, the Azure Arc Resource Bridge is a preview capability, so we don't have information about the pricing similar to Azure Virtual Desktop, but I expect that it's for free because we use Azure Arc Resource Bridge to deploy virtual machines, and we discussed 4 weeks ago the licensing option of Azure Virtual Desktop. So there is a pricing for using virtual machines. There's a pricing for using containers. There will be some announcement about how it works with Azure Virtual Desktop. So Azure Arc Resource Bridge is, let's say, a vehicle. It's a tool to optimize the experience, how to deploy it. And so my expectation is that it will be for free. Today it's for free, but this is usually the situation when these are preview features. Yeah.
Do we know when the Azure Arc Resource Bridge will be general available? Because some of the customers who want to use it may think, okay, as long as it's in a preview, I'm not really sure if I can work with it in my environment. Are there any news about that, or do you expect to get something next week?
I expect this, otherwise I wouldn't have, let's say, killed my 2 other resource bridges because they worked fine. So my expectation is that I will be able to let's say, upgrade. Upgrade will not work. This is already announced by Microsoft. So Microsoft said these older resource bridges that were in preview have to be newly installed. So I'm not sure if I should have the expectation that with Ignite we will have the final version. I don't think so, but I'm not sure. But my expectation is that in the Azure portal, this information that this is not the full feature set will be removed. So when we look back to my cluster here, this one, for example, when I go to the virtual machine images, I had this information bar that said limited experience. So my expectation is that we will have a new preview with Ignite that has the full feature set where we can test everything, and that we will have an announcement at Ignite when it will be public available. This is what I expect, but I don't know it.
Yeah. Okay, so again, I'm curious about what's coming next week at Ignite.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what we have to add, Sven, when we now trigger Ignite or promote Ignite, if you look to the session catalog, maybe you will wonder a little bit because there is no session about these things we are talking here and where I'm expecting that we have new preview features. But what you have to know, Microsoft has these sessions at Ignite, but Microsoft also has a lot of announcements around Ignite. So it's not only the sessions itself, where you maybe will not find one for Azure Arc Resource Bridge and no one for Azure Stack HCI and so on, but you will have several announcements next week from the product group, and you should listen, and you should join the next Azure Stack HCI show where we bring all this information to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So is there anything else you would like to show us about the Azure Arc or Resource Bridge?
Yeah, absolutely. We can use some of these features. So I will not download the image. You can see here this works, but this will take the time that I need to download 6 gigabytes. So this is not very impressive. But what it's interesting, we could use the functionality to manage some of my virtual machines I already have deployed, and for sure we can also deploy a virtual machine. So let's have a look here at the machines, and I can see here, for example, the virtual machine 2020. This is a machine that is running. Let's have a look at this machine in the Azure portal. And Sven had these questions to find out what's the difference between Azure Arc Resource Bridge and Azure Arc itself. This virtual machine itself, the client, the cluster 101 virtual machine 2020 has no Azure Arc agent installed inside the virtual machine. So inside this virtual machine, we don't have an Azure Arc agent, but my Azure Stack HCI cluster is Arc enabled, and I have an Azure Arc resource bridge in this environment. So, and this is the reason why I can see the virtual machine. I can see the configuration, for example, 4 CPU cores, 8 gigabytes of memory. Let's check if this is true. Let's go to the virtual machine. This is this virtual machine locally. Let's go to the settings and let's see what the settings say. Okay, we have 8 gigs of memory. Dynamic memory is configured. We have 4 virtual processors. We have actually 1 hard disk drive. So let's try to change some of these things. Let's change the size of the machine. And let's change the size of the virtual machine from 4 virtual CPUs to 8 virtual CPUs. We'll save this change. So this information to change the number of virtual CPUs will be sent to the Azure Arc Resource Bridge locally. The Azure Arc Resource Bridge takes the information from the virtual machine, changes it to 8, and then I will be able saved size, successfully saved size for virtual machine. Now let's check if it already is changed in my local environment. I will go to the settings. And I can see this machine now has 8 virtual processors. Previously, it was 4. So for sure, we have the delay from the portal to the resource bridge, but we don't have the delay if you have a complex operation that everything is sent from the Azure portal, because the Azure portal collects the information what should be done. It sends this information to the resource bridge. Then I get the feedback it sent. It's already there. And then it's locally. If you think, for example, what happens if the connection is disconnected, if something happens to my Azure connectivity, then you have 2 situations. If the connection between your cluster and Azure is disconnected while the information is sent to the resource bridge, then you will see an error message in the Azure portal where it says it could not be sent. Yeah, it was interrupted. And if it's completely submitted to the local resource bridge, then it's not important if the resource bridge already has finished the work, because the resource bridge can work independently. Maybe this is also important to add this to our conversation about finding out where I need the Azure Arc resource bridge. The Azure Arc resource bridge gives us also the flexibility to finish such hybrid transactions if there is a disconnection between Azure and the on-premises environment. So let's do another thing. Let's go to the disks and let's try to add a disk to this machine. Maybe we need some additional storage. I will choose add new disk to this machine, and I will use a CL101 VM22 disk 02. It's a size in gigabyte, for example, 100 gigabytes. It's a dynamic disk I want to use here. And via add, this information is sent to the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. Sorry, not now. I have to save it. When I go to save, this information is sent to the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. Here I can read creating disk. but it does not create a 100 GB disk in Azure and distribute it to Azure Arc Resource Bridge. It sends the command to create this disk to the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. The disk is successfully created. Now I have an additional step, updating virtual machine, because for sure the virtual machine needs this configuration. And when this updating virtual machine has finished, then I will be able to see this new disk on my locally running virtual machine. Successfully updated virtual machine. Let's go to the configuration of the machine, and let's open the configuration of the virtual machine again. And let's see, I have an additional virtual hard disk, exactly this one, the CL101 VM 2020 disk 02. And if you think a moment about these capabilities, it's very impressive, because what we here see is only a small feature set of what we will have in the final version. We can read this on every page in the Azure portal. This is actually only limited functionality there. And when you ever used Azure, you know that we have a role-based model here. So we can use the security concept of Azure to provide usage rights to different users. Or let's imagine you are the partner that is managing several customers, and every customer has its Azure Arc Resource Bridge in an Azure Stack HCI environment. Then you can use Lighthouse, and you could say, okay, let's put a disk on every file server at every partner site. Or let's add a domain controller, an additional disk, or let's increase the amount of virtual CPUs on all domain controllers in all environments from 2 virtual CPUs to 4 virtual CPUs, because maybe we have new requirements. So this is really, really cool and powerful. We can do this with the disks. We have seen the size, CPU and memory. We can do this with the networking, so we could add network interfaces. And we can add extensions. Sven asked about the security capabilities. So actually we don't have them here, but I expect also for the future that we can configure via Azure Arc Resource Bridge the security capabilities for a new virtual machine. Today, this is an Azure Arc agent feature. So if I would enable this here for this virtual machine, I could deploy the Arc agent. And here we can see we can export the template. This is a virtual machine that is running on my environment, but I'm managing this virtual machine via the resource bridge in the Azure portal. And maybe you have heard in the past about the Azure Resource Manager, the ARM. And what we here can see are these templates that are used by the Azure Resource Manager. The Azure Resource Manager is the, let's say, the part in the control plane that is responsible for the whole automation things. So if you prefer to script your changes, you could change here the things and deploy these changes. You could go here to deploy and bring this to your environment. And for sure, you can also visualize what you see in this template here. This is not so impressive for this single virtual machine, but let's imagine you have a template that consists of 3 virtual machines. Let's again think about Lighthouse and several customers you have. Or let's imagine about a retail scenario where you have your central site and many distributed sites. Then you could say for each new location, we will deploy a new domain controller, we will deploy a new file server, and we will deploy, for example, a new application host, everything based on this virtual machine here. And this is similar to what you have in the System Center Virtual Machine Manager. Those of you that know the System Center Virtual Machine Manager, there we had service templates. And service templates could consist of several virtual machines. And sorry, I'm always talking about the virtual machines. For sure, this can also be containers. And this can also be a mix of virtual machines, containers, and applications, because we can also deploy SQL Server in containers or on virtual machines via this Azure Arc capabilities. So this is really, really very powerful, and this is very impressive if customers see this first time and realize what's possible via this way.
I have a question about the architecture of Resource Bridge, from my understanding. So Azure Arc is only an agent.
Mm-hmm.
Resource Bridge will be deployed in a virtual machine, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Is it one resource bridge per cluster, or is it one resource bridge per customer, as long as all the clusters are in the same network? So how many resource bridges do I need?
Mm-hmm. The resource bridge is today configuration that is related to the cluster. So if I'm a customer with one site and two clusters, these two clusters are in the same data center, and I want to have the Azure Arc Resource Bridge for this environment, I will have two Azure Arc Resource Bridges. And today, I have also to download the images twice, because today it's not possible to say, I use the images from Resource Bridge A to deploy machines on cluster B. So we can see this here when I go to my custom locations. Every resource bridge brings a custom location with the resource bridge configuration. And I don't have a clear naming convention here because I tested different things, but you could say, okay, let's say the first custom location is, for example, data center Munich. The second one is, for example, data center Berlin, and we have a data center, it's a data center Frankfurt, and things like this. So this is how you would think about custom locations. But if you have the situation like in my scenario, where I have all the virtual, all these resource bridges in one location, so these are all resource bridges that are located in my demo environment, then you must do things like this. This is, for example, the resource bridge Munich cluster 01, and then we have the resource bridge Munich and cluster 02, and so on, because we have this resource bridge for each cluster. I'm not sure if this maybe will change in the future, because exactly what you are asking, Sven, will be a question that every larger customer has, that says, okay, maybe I don't have this distributed scenario I described, but maybe I have one data center with 20 clusters, and then I would have 20 resource bridges. If these are different sites, this is fine. But if this is one cluster, maybe the customer will expect to have one of these. Today, we have to have one resource bridge for each cluster.
Mm-hmm. How big is the footprint of the resource bridge? So I'm thinking about a customer, let's say in retail, 1,000 sites, and every site should run its own Azure Stack HCI cluster. Could be a single node cluster or a dual node cluster, not so big. And they, of course, want to use as a Azure Arc Resource Bridge because of all the benefits like starting and deploying and so on and so on. How big is the footprint?
Yeah, the footprint is what Microsoft configures is 4 virtual processors and 8 gigabytes of memory. But if you use the resource bridge intensively, you will realize that it would be helpful to increase the memory to 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes, but it works with 8 gigabytes. So as you can see on this cluster, I have something like 50 virtual machines. So it's no problem to do this with this resource bridge, but this is the absolute minimum requirement. So this is the minimum footprint of the resource bridge that is today supported in the preview. This can change in the final version with a smaller footprint, with a bigger footprint, I don't know it, but it works fine with this 4 virtual processors, 8 gigabytes of memory. It works better if you increase the memory. It works on a single node. I think in some of the previous Azure Stack HCI shows, we already talked about some workshops I'm providing, and I'm also providing an Azure Stack HCI hybrid workshop. And in this hybrid workshop, since it's available, the resource bridge is an important part. And because of this resource bridge part, I switched in my workshop environment from virtual machines to physical hosts because the virtual machines were not powerful enough. So we really need physical hosts for deploying the resource bridge. And the physical host, maybe this is also important, has to have minimum 64 gigabytes of memory. We consume 8 gigabytes for the resource bridge. It needs 64 gigabytes minimum, and it needs a volume with 1 terabyte of size. This is checked. So if your storage volume is smaller than 1 terabyte of size, it will not accept it.
Okay, very good. So my understanding of Azure Arc Resource Bridge is much better than 1 hour ago. So thank you for that. Is there anything you would like to add before we are closing the session for our international friends and continue with some German-related information?
Yeah, so if you so enthusiastic like I am about the resource bridge, maybe it's a good idea to not deploy it today, but wait till next week, because as I mentioned, this is a preview. Microsoft says you cannot upgrade it to the next version. You have to reinstall it. You shouldn't use it in a production environment and so on. So I'm really looking forward to the next version, and I'm absolutely sure we will use one of the next Azure Stack HCI shows to show you what is new for the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. Maybe not the next one, because in the next one we will talk about the general news about Azure Stack HCI and Azure Arc from the Ignite.
Okay, so let's close this session for our international friends. And as always, the German ones can be a little bit longer in the show, as we would like to present some German language offerings after the closing. But for everyone in the call, there are multiple options to watch the Azure Stack HCI show. So on Manfred's YouTube channel, on mine, and on the Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk YouTube channel. So if you have not already done this, please look after the Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk on YouTube and follow this channel as well, so you do not miss anything. Because next week and the weeks after, I will present a lot of content, new content on this Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk channel about the announcements of Azure of Microsoft Ignite. So if you do not want to miss anything, Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk will be your place to be. And even on LinkedIn, you will find a channel, Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk, where a lot of MVPs and Microsoft colleagues and myself will post about Azure Stack HCI and hybrid news. So yeah, would be perfect if you follow these two channels. And the next session, Azure Stack HCI, will be November 24th. So looking forward to see you again in 2 weeks with all the highlights of Microsoft Ignite in one show. So we say goodbye to our international friends, and then we switch to German as always. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ja, und somit sind wir wieder bei Deutsch. Es ist immer wieder interessant, so von einer Sprache zur anderen zu switchen. Aber ich hoffe, es gelingt uns. Wir haben nächste Woche die Ignite und all diese Announcements, die dort kommen, mit all den Details aus der technischen Perspektive, werden wir uns auf der Hybrid-Konferenz am 29. und 30. November anschauen. Das Ganze findet in Würzburg statt, eine Veranstaltung von Manfred. Deshalb kann man auch hier teilnehmen, indem man auf manfredhelber.de/hybrid-Konferenz geht und sich dort noch einen Platz sichern. Da werden jede Menge Microsoft-Kollegen mit dabei sein, die dort einfach Live-Demos machen, Strategien präsentieren. Auch ich werde meinen Part haben, aber am meisten freue ich mich natürlich drauf, euch alle dort wieder mal in Person zu sehen, zu networken. Das ist ein Zweitages-Event inklusive einem schönen Get-Together am ersten Abend. Also wenn ihr Lust habt, dabei zu sein, würde mich freuen. Dann sehen wir uns nämlich am 29. und 30. November. Ja, und ansonsten die Hybrid Show ist ja bekanntermaßen immer nach der Azure Stack HCI Show, auch heute wieder um 14 Uhr. Der Erik Berg und Manfred sprechen über Ignite. Das heißt, ihr werdet schon die ganzen Announcements raushauen, die Microsoft erst nächste Woche raushaut, oder?
So ist der Plan. Microsoft muss ja irgendwann mal seine Sessions online schalten, dass es passiert. Und an den Sessions kann man natürlich schon ein bisschen ablesen, was dort so alles erzählt wird. Natürlich können wir nicht in die Zukunft gucken und keine Geheimnisse verraten, aber wir werden mal ein bisschen durch den Session-Katalog durchgehen und schauen, was in der hybriden Welt interessant ist, was man sich vielleicht angucken sollte. Und von daher wird es, glaube ich, eine kurzweilige, spannende Stunde.
Und der Erik ist auch gerade in Seattle, oder?
Noch nicht.
Noch nicht.
Also, wenn
Er
ich recht informiert bin, fliegt er am Wochenende. Er ist in Seattle, er ist da, aber er müsste heute noch aus Deutschland dabei sein, ja.
Wunderbar. Naja, und dann haben wir auch wieder mal eine On-Prem-Show mit dem Carsten Rachfal am 16.11., also nächste Woche. Da haben wir ja dann im Grunde die ganzen Announcements im Grunde schon durch. Wir rechnen ja damit, dass wahrscheinlich Dienstagabend deutsche Zeit das sogenannte Book of News verfügbar ist. Da kann man dann so ein bisschen reinschauen. Und in der Sendung am 16.11. widmen sich Carsten und Manfred euren Fragen. Das heißt, ihr seid am besten live dabei, stellt die dann wie immer über das Chatfenster und diskutiert dann mit beiden darüber, was euch so an offenen Fragen noch übrig geblieben sind. Ich denke mal, viele werden jetzt auch mit den ganzen Announcements zu tun haben, die wir nächste Woche.
Genau, die werden wir sicher auch ein bisschen aufgreifen, aber in der On-Premises-Welt sind es ja immer gar nicht mehr so viele, wobei es ja eine Session gibt zu Windows Server VNext und Hyper-V, die aber nur in Seattle stattfindet. Also ob wir da schon was dazu sagen können, müssen wir mal gucken. Nee, können wir nicht, weil die On-Prem-Show ist am Donnerstag und die Session ist erst am Freitag. Also können wir definitiv noch nichts sagen. Aber wir können da sicher auch ein bisschen.
Vielleicht steht ja im Book of
ja.
News über den nächsten Server schon was drin.
Das
Also
schauen
ich
wir mal,
freue
ja.
mich auf jeden Fall ganz arg drauf.
Ja.
Ja, dann haben wir die WBSC Skills auch wieder im November und da hatten wir ja schon die Session am Montag zu Microsoft Copilot für Windows 11 und ansonsten ja, geht es auch um die News von der Ignite. Da geht es dann im Grunde schon los am 20. und 27.11. Und dann haben wir am 13.11., also quasi vor der Ignite, auch nochmal so ein bisschen was zum Thema Copilot, ne, in Verbindung mit Bing Chat.
Genau. Es gibt ja nicht den Copilot, sondern es gibt ja verschiedene Integrationen. Manchmal ist Copilot, manchmal ist Chat und da sprechen wir über die Dinge, die Microsoft noch so bietet, neben dem Microsoft Copilot für Windows 11.
Ja, und ansonsten bekommen wir natürlich immer wieder mal zwischendurch jede Menge Fragen zu allen möglichen Themen, Lizenzierung, Technik, Produkte. Hier nochmal der Hinweis darauf, der WBSC Support findet alle 14 Tage statt, immer freitags vor der HCI-Show, nächstes Mal wieder am 24.11. Eine ganze Stunde, die sich Manfred euch widmet. Also einfach live dabei sein, die Fragen ins Chatfenster reinposten und Manfred versucht die dann in der Sendung noch zu beantworten. Also hier auch heute in 14 Tagen, 10 Uhr, die nächste Supportstunde. Naja, ansonsten über LinkedIn haben wir ja schon gesprochen. Das ist so der Weg, wo wir hauptsächlich kommunizieren. Also schaut da einfach mal nach. Da findet ihr den Manfred, da findet ihr mich, da findet ihr die Azure Stack HCI Show und da findet ihr auch Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk. Schaut, dass ihr einfach den Kanälen folgt und dann verpasst ihr da gar nichts. Und auch auf YouTube natürlich, auch das vorhin schon mal erwähnt, gibt es verschiedene Kanäle von Manfred, von mir, vom Tech Talk. Einfach da auch schauen, dass ihr folgt, weil dann kriegt ihr immer proaktiv eine Meldung, wenn auf den Kanälen was passiert. Sowas wie die Azure Stack HCI Shows streamen wir über alle 3 Channels, weil da sind wir beide dabei. Aber es gibt auch entsprechend Dinge, die der Manfred zum Beispiel nur auf seinem Kanal hat, wie zum Beispiel die Sessions, die er mit dem Carsten oder dem Erik macht. Und es gibt eben auch Content, der nur auf meinem Channel ist oder eben nur auf dem Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk. Also von daher, wenn ihr auf Nummer sicher gehen wollt, einfach allen Kanälen folgen und und dann verpasst ihr da nichts. Und apropos verpassen, es gibt natürlich den WBSC-Kalender, da packen wir zumindest mal alles rein, was mit dem Windows Business Solution Club zu tun hat, was mit der Azure Stack HCI Show zu tun hat. Also all die Termine könnt ihr euch in euren Kalender abonnieren. Schaut einfach unter manfredhelber.de/Kalender nach, wie das Ganze funktioniert. Und wenn ihr statt Kalender Newsletter reinschreibt, habt ihr auch noch die Möglichkeit, den Newsletter zu abonnieren, den der Manfred dann auch immer wieder mal raushaut, um euch damit vertraut zu machen, was denn so alles an Optionen gibt. Und von daher sind wir jetzt an dem Punkt, wo wir Tschüss sagen, wo wir ein schönes Wochenende wünschen. Ich wünsche euch auf jeden Fall, dass ihr gut in die nächste Woche kommt. Freue mich, wenn wir ganz viele tolle Announcements hoffentlich haben werden und werden uns dann spätestens in der Azure Stack HCI Show in 2 Wochen hören. Aber ich vermute mal schon früher. Also bis dann, die letzten Worte gehören immer dem Manfred. Tschüss.
Ja, prima. Dann hoffe ich, dass wir uns in einer Stunde nochmal sehen zur Hybrid Show, um uns schon ein bisschen auf die Ignite einzustimmen. Und dann wünsche ich euch auch ein schönes Wochenende und bis zum Montag zu den WBSC Skills. Macht's gut. Tschüss.